This year, Zildjian celebrates their 400th anniversary as the cymbal maker and is the oldest manufacturer of musical instruments in the world. And today we will go over the family history and highlight the major players and events that allowed this family to not only survive, but to thrive and stay on top despite political upheaval, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, family disputes, legal battles, and an evolving need for their cymbals over the centuries. The Zildjian story starts in the early 17th century with a young Armenian alchemist in the city of Constantinople, what is now Istanbul. Like many alchemists of his time, Avedis I was experimenting with various types of base metals and searching for a way to transform them into gold, but instead stumbled onto something else. He created an alloy with a very unique and brilliant sound, and then discovered how to make it strong enough to withstand being heated and rolled repeatedly without breaking. This alloy is known today as B20 bronze and consists of 80% copper, 20% tin, and a trace of silver. But the exact process for casting these metals would become a family secret that would be handed down for generations and which is still guarded today. In 1618, Sultan Osman II asked Avedis I to manufacture cymbals for his Janissary bands, calls to prayer, religious ceremonies, and the Ottoman army. In appreciation for his contribution, Avedis was given 80 gold pieces and the family name Zildjian, which translated means the son of the cymbal maker. In 1623, and with the permission of Sultan Mustafa I, Avedis left the service of the palace, started a foundry and cymbal making factory in the town of Samatia on the European side of Constantinople, marking the official beginning of the company. Avedis would pass down the secret process to his son Agop around 1651. Through the rest of the 17th and 18th centuries, the family history is not well documented, but the business survives and eventually gets passed on to Zildjian Zildjian, who has 2 sons, Avedis II and Karapi, also pronounced Karop, who will both be critical in the years that follow. As was the tradition, the control of the company was handed down to the eldest son, Avedis II, who ran the business from 1851 until his death in 1865. Avedis II moved the family business forward in a big way and was the first to manufacture cymbals using the Zildjian name. Prior to 1851, they were simply known as Turkish cymbals. During that year, Avedis II built a 25-foot schooner and sailed it from Constantinople to Marseille and then on to London, where he introduced the cymbals at world trade fairs. At the fairs of Paris and London in 1851, and again in London in 1862, his Avedis Zildjian branded cymbals won several awards for excellence. When he passed, Avedis II had 2 sons, Aram and Hartoon, but neither of them were old enough, so the business was passed on to his younger brother, Karapi. Karapi also moved the ball forward and continued traveling to exhibitions in Europe's major culture and trade centers, further enhancing the family's reputation, winning 10 decorations and medals and many certificates of commendation. He created the now famous K Zildjian trademark after his own name and continued to run the foundry in Istanbul until his death in 1909. Karapi had 12 children of his own, 2 sons, Diran and Levin, and 10 daughters, but neither son was of age in 1909, so control of the business was passed back to Avedis II's side of the family, specifically his younger son Aram. The eldest son, Hartoon, was heavily invested in law and politics and was not interested in cymbal making. But this is where the story really starts to get crazy. While Aram is in command of the family business, there were ethnic conflicts that took place in the Ottoman Empire, namely the massacre of Armenian Christians. And so Aram joins an Armenian nationalist movement and decides to stage an assassination on Sultan Abdul Hamid II by blowing up his carriage using a homemade bomb. The bomb goes off early, the attempt fails, and Aram is forced to flee the country and moves to Bucharest. During this period and through Aram's return to Istanbul, Karapi's 2 sons, 1 cousin, and at least 1 daughter, Victoria, who was taught the family secret process, took over control of the factory where they continued to make K Zildjian cymbals. They were later joined by their nephews Mikhail Dolgarian and his brother Karapi. In 1927, Aram was ready to step down and wrote a letter to his nephew Avedis III, the direct grandson of Avedis II, offering him control of the family business rather than extending that offer to Mikhail, who was already involved in running the foundry but was technically not a Zildjian, even though his mother, Agop, was Karapi Zildjian's daughter. This would cause a major feud with that side of the family, whose name would later be changed to Zildjian. in response to the Turkish government's banning of Armenian last names and one that sounds a whole lot like Zildjian. At the time he received the letter, Avedis III had already left Turkey due to the country's continuing hostility towards Armenians. He seized an opportunity to move to the United States and settled in Boston in 1908, and although he had worked at the factory as a child, had no interest in returning to Istanbul to make cymbals. While the family business was rich in tradition and prestige, it just wasn't very profitable. By 1927, Avedis was settled down, had a successful business making and selling candy to the large department stores of the time, and was married to an American woman, Sally Goodale. It was Sally who convinced Avedis to consider getting involved in the cymbal making business for the benefit of their two sons, Armand and Robert. She felt that there just wasn't anything too special about making candy, but the business of cymbal making was a unique opportunity that came with hundreds of years of tradition and the mystique of a family secret that had been handed down through generations. And with the American market gradually becoming the main source of demand for the Turkish-made cymbals, it seemed like a great idea at the perfect time. And so with this, Avedis III wrote Aram that he would agree to take over the family business provided it moved to Boston. Aram agreed, and in 1929, the newly formed Avedis Zildjian Company opened a foundry in Quincy, Massachusetts, and began making handmade cymbals for the growing American music movement. There was one problem, however, and it was a big one. A year before writing the letter to Avedis, Aram had signed an agreement with the Fred Gretsch Company, giving them ownership and exclusive distribution of the Zildjian, K Zildjian, and A Zildjian trademarks. So while he was able to start making cymbals in the United States using the family formula, he was not able to use the name Zildjian, K Zildjian, or A Zildjian, or stop the factory in Turkey, which was now in control of Karapi's side of the family. In order not to violate these trademarks, he had to use his full name, Avedis Zildjian, and predominantly stamp Made in USA on each cymbal to sufficiently identify that his cymbals were not the same as the ones coming out of Turkey. He was, however, legally allowed to use the stamp Genuine Turkish Cymbals because, as the court stated, it correctly implies that the cymbals are of the Turkish type. Avedis had some major advantages, however, and he used them with great effect. By this time, the U.S. was the largest market for cymbals and ground zero of the jazz movement. Using relationships he had built with great drummers such as Chick Webb, Joe Jones, Buddy Rich, and most importantly, Gene Krupa, he was able to get valuable advice on how to craft his cymbals to better fit the changing musical environment. Up to this point, cymbals were being made as they had been for 300 years, more like this and less like this, and without the input of those who played them, or any consideration of what exactly they needed to make better music. Terms such as ride or crash simply did not exist, and although Avedis was credited for making the cymbal industry what it is today, his son Robert was quoted as saying, "People who are trying to deify my father will never understand that he didn't develop the stuff. It finally came through him, and thank God he was open enough to listen to the musicians, to turn their needs and suggestions into good musical instruments." During the Second World War, Zildjian made cymbals for the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps marching bands. They also got orders from the British Admiralty. This was a very important part of the company's business because copper and tin were allocated by the War Production Board. Without these orders, they probably would have had to close down until the war was over. Meanwhile, back in Turkey, Mikhail and Karapi Zildjian continued to produce K Zildjians. In 1951, the Avedis Zildjian Company finally won back the rights to the A Zildjian trademark from the Fred Gretsch Company. In 1955, they tried to take it further by filing another suit to get the rest of the Zildjian trademarks back, arguing that nobody in Turkey had the right to make a Zildjian. Mikhail flew over as a witness for Gretsch to substantiate their claim that it wasn't the same product, and a jury decided that A Zildjian and K Zildjian cymbals were different instruments. So the old Gretsch contract stood, and it went on that K's kept coming out of Turkey and the A's kept coming out of the US, both using the Zildjian name, but totally different companies. Avedis III steadily built his business and brand, eventually involving his two sons, Armand and Robert, who were both taught the secret process. The business got a meteoric boost after the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. Armand was quoted as saying, "We were a small business at the time the Beatles came in. And then we found ourselves with a 93,000 cymbal backorder just because of Ringo Starr. By now, Avedis was outselling the K Zildjians many times over, and by 1968, Robert Zildjian negotiated the purchase of the K Zildjian factory in Turkey and all the European trademarks back on behalf of the Avedis Zildjian Company. By 1973, Robert had entered into an agreement with Baldwin, who by then owned Gretsch, guaranteeing them exclusive distribution rights in the US for 10 years in exchange for all their Zildjian-held trademarks. By the early 1970s, the company had outgrown its factory in Quincy and moved to Norwell, Massachusetts. The factory in Istanbul was finally closed down in 1977. Armand was named president in 1976, and being the eldest son, was in charge of the family business after his father passed away in 1979. But he and his brother Robert got along and ran the company together for several years before having irreconcilable differences. And by 1981, Robert Zildjian left and launched the Sabian cymbal company in New Brunswick, Canada, where Zildjian had set up a subsidiary company in 1968 called ASCO. This factory eventually employed some of the master cymbal makers from the closed-down Istanbul factory, including Mikhail Zildjian. But we'll save that story for a different video. Armand continued to run Zildjian, and like his father, stayed in the trenches with the big-name drummers of his time and took the company to new heights. When he passed away in 2002, control of the company went to his daughters, Craigie and Debbie, who run the company today, which is still located in Norwell, Massachusetts. If you hung with me this long, you're awesome, and I appreciate it. If you like this video, please like the video, and thank you for watching.